It looks like we've got a few attendees coming in. I'm just going to give them a few more seconds here, and then we'll get Rick started. Okay, guys, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So Rick, if you would like to just go ahead and introduce yourself and jump right in, that would be great.
I certainly will. Thanks, Courtney. I appreciate that. And I appreciate all of you letting me come with you tonight and talk to you about dog care and some procedures that over the years I've learned have been working for me, and hopefully they're going to be working for you. First, before I begin, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about myself and qualify myself to you. I've been training dogs and managing my trainers for 46 years. I've been involved in inboard training, which has been my passion and specialty. And that means we take dogs into a facility, a kennel, and we train them usually for a basic training of 1 month or a second month right after the first month for advanced or off leash. And that's what I've done predominantly my whole life. How I started was after college. I have a degree in sociology and psychology. I went to work for a veterinarian clinic and worked for a clinic for about a year, learning how to manage dogs, the medical side of everything, because I knew once I began training dogs, I probably wouldn't have another chance to learn the kinds of things that I did working for a veterinarian. And it was a wonderful year learning all kinds of management and different temperaments and the medical side of what I do. After I did that, I traveled the country. I went and worked for kennels and dog trainers, anywhere I could get a job that looked like it was productive and professional. And I traveled with my German Shepherd, Christy, and went all across the country and began to get about another year and a half, 2 years of information from other people. And gradually I started to see that I felt that I knew as much and was doing much better than some of the people I work for. So I began to look for places where I could start my own training business. And I did that up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I started a kennel called Lindemar Kennels in San Francisco area. And that's where I started my first inboard training business. And after that, I worked for Guide Dogs for the Blind. Even while I was training my own dogs, I went to work for Guide Dogs for the Blind, worked for them for about 3 years, and then eventually I bought my own kennel. And that's where I've been the last 39 years. And this last year, I retired.
Rick, can I pause you for 1 moment? I just want to make sure that everyone can hear you. If you guys can hear Rick, please type yes in the chat box. And for everyone, okay, good. I'm getting a lot of yeses. I just wanted to make sure.
Okay, so if we're all on, that's great. Let me go on a little bit more here. Now, before I begin and talking about some of the things I'd like to talk about, I'd like to start out by saying that, when I talk about some of these things, some of you may hear things in my talk. I hope a lot of things that you enjoy, but you're going to be hearing some things that you may not like to hear because it may be part of some things you've decided to do that may not be the greatest thing that you've done. For example, maybe having a young puppy in an apartment when both of you are working a full-time job. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not here to judge anybody, and I'm going to tell you, when I started out with my first German Shepherd in college, I did it exactly wrong. I bought her for $50 in Southern Illinois University. I lived in an apartment with 3 other roommates, and they elected me to have my dog as long as I paid any damage and picked up the poop and did all those things. So this $50 dog cost me about $1,000 in my first year because I had to pay for all the things she damaged. So I'm not judging everybody, but over the years, I've learned a formula style that I feel as though will be helpful to you as we start talking. So I don't want you to think that I'm judging you. I'm not. I've made every mistake that I'm going to talk to you about potentially at least twice. So just feel free that this is not a judging thing. This is about trying to help you and give you some information that may assist you. Now, the other thing that I'm going to say is, over the years, what I've really kind of come to terms with is that I'm a dog trainer for pets and their families. So I'm a pet dog trainer. I'm not a protection dog trainer. I'm not a scent and discrimination trainer. I'm not an agility trainer. My passion is training dogs and then training people and making a nice match in a family. That's what my function is, and that's what my passion is. And over the years, my school has been called the Hollywood Dog Training School, but also the Hollywood Dog Training School and Marriage Counseling, because I'm sure, as all of you know, some of the most impassioned conversations you've had is over dog rearing practices and what you're doing, whether you think you're right or wrong, and some of them have gotten pretty heated. So over the years, I've kind of served as a mediator in a lot of ways between my clients and their dogs. So that's one thing that I just wanted to bring up. Now, so what I've come up with is, a lot of this sounds like it's logical, and the best way to raise a dog clearly is to have a house with a backyard. And if we're going to start talking about a puppy that's 8 to 10 weeks old, we're going to be talking about having a crate for crate training and housebreaking, and ideally having a dog run outside so that your dog is not become your Siamese twin. You do not want to have a dog that's 8 to 10 weeks old and be with you 24/7, because you need to create for your dog the kind of behavior pattern that you would like to have throughout owning your dog. And that is, your dog needs to be comfortable by himself and bonded with you. But when you put him in a crate or you put him in a dog run, he should be comfortable enough to not bark and scream and carry on in a way that makes you crazy. And sometimes when we start out with a puppy, we spend so much time with them, and maybe we take time off from work, and maybe we're teachers and we take the summer and we do it real correctly. And then all of a sudden you go back to work and this dog goes, hey, where did everybody go? And they start having a rough time and they start barking or screaming. And, it takes you a while to get your dog into balance. So I try to tell my clients from the beginning to try to get a balanced life. That is the key. Consistency is the key to everything, and a balanced relationship is the next key. So what we start talking about is from 8 to 10 weeks, dog training and training starts from the day you bring the puppy home. So we can talk dog training from 8 weeks to 10 weeks. And that's, of course, the time that we're so enamored and we love these dogs. And we're starting to think about the only thing we should be doing is loving them, housebreaking them, and just watching them sleep, because most puppies sleep 80 to 90% of the day away. So when they're 8 to 10 weeks old, they're real easy. When they start getting 12, 13 weeks old, that's when they start waking up more, and that's when we start introducing a collar to them, putting a collar on them so that as they walk around the house, they push against the wall and try to get the collar off. But we're introducing a collar because shortly we're going to start some training with a leash and collar, and we need the puppy to be used to that. So around 3 months, somewhere between 10, 11, 12 weeks, we want to put a collar on, usually a nice nylon collar, and so we can attach a leash to it and start walking them around our house and backyard and getting them to what we call leash and collar breaking. The other thing that we're going to talk about is when a puppy comes to about 4 months old, that's when we as professionals like to start training. We do not recommend that our clients do that and train at 4 months old, but we as professionals do that. When I work for Guide Dogs for the Blind, their numbers of years of experience, and they've done more research, I think, than almost any other dog organization. And they're very similar to the Monks of Skeet. So a lot of you that have read the Monks of Skeet book, it's very similar to Guide Dogs for the Blind. But they find that imprinting goes on between 3.5 and 5 months old. So this is the time that if you're going to be introducing things in terms of training, it needs to be done correctly. So we don't want to do it wrong, and that's why you may need a professional if you're going to have your puppy trained at 4.5 to 5 months old. You may want to do that with an inboard trainer. You could also do some training with people coming to your home, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. There's different methods of dog training. But again, my specialty is in board training, and so that's why you'll hear me talk from that perspective quite a bit. I've also done, and we do in my business that I ran for 39 years, we did in-home training, and we did private lessons, and we did in-board. So we've done it all. The only thing that I really didn't do are park classes or group classes. So with that said, let's now start talking about Doodle, because that's what we're all here to talk about. You know, when I got phone calls from people and my secretaries leave me a message and I see I have a phone call from a Doodle owner, I know that I'm going to get on that phone and I'm going to hear, Rick, I love my dog. I love my dog to death, but this dog is making me crazy. And, you know, Doodles, no matter what you've bred to, we start out with a poodle as our base. And one of the most hyper dogs in the world, along with maybe Dobermans and some terriers, are poodles. When you get a standard poodle, you're dealing with an electric hot tamale. And when you breed with other breeds, like the first started out with Labradoodles and Golden Doodles, it was more than the average person really knew that they were getting hooked into. So many people bought Doodles early on because of their hypoallergenic qualities. You know, so many people have allergies, and also they didn't like hair all over their house, and they thought, wow, this is the perfect way to not have allergy and not have hair flying around my house. They just omitted finding out that they're dealing with one of the most hyper dogs on the planet. So when they got this puppy and it started getting into 5, 6, 8 months old, I get calls like crazy because they really don't know what to do with these puppies. And one of the clearest things that I can say is it is always better to create good behaviors. It is so much harder to solve problem-solving behaviors after they've been established. And here's the other thing. There's always a genetic component to environmental components. Of course, which came first, the chicken or the egg, or heredity versus environment? That's always what we're dealing with. But when we have a young puppy that's 3 to 4 months old, if we have an extreme behavior, clearly that's a genetic issue. There's nothing that anybody does wrong when they get an 8 to 10, 11-week-old puppy that is going to make a dog a crazy dog. This is, if you start getting a dog that you try to crate and it's screaming for hours on end, that's usually something to do with genetics, because the average dog being put in a crate, dogs like to den, they should go in there, maybe scream the first day for an hour, but every day thereafter, it should be a lot less, and that's normal. When we get behaviors that are extreme, those can be generally passed through genetics, and unfortunately, those issues are a little bit harder to deal with. But let's back up to the average dog right now. Near the end of my speech here, or conversation with you, I did look over all your questions that you put up on Courtney and your website, and I did go over all of those. And I'm going to deal with them in a way, but all of them really have the same concept behind it. And a lot of it was obsessive compulsive behaviors in your dog. But let's hold off on that for a moment and get back to your questions and your issues. I started talking about the best thing to do is have a house with a backyard, a dog crate, and a dog run. But, listen, if you have an apartment and you happen to work out of your house and you have, maybe you're a couple that work out of your house, you can clearly have a puppy and do the work that needs to be done. But I tell you, it's much harder. It is nice to have a backyard and let a dog roam around freely and sniff and smell and see their environment and enjoy being outside. And when we live in an apartment and a puppy is a puppy, it's not leash and collar, bro. So we can't really give it that early experience that we would like to with a backyard. So sometimes if you are people with an apartment and if you have any friends that have a home, sometimes I've found creatively, if they're close enough, sometimes you may make an agreement with them to have your puppy go to their backyard so they're just not restricted in the house all day in your apartment. And here's another thing. When you start getting shots with your veterinarian, one of the things that I really hate is veterinarians will say to you, listen, while we're doing these shots, I really don't want you taking the puppy out, and I want you to keep the puppy at home and wait till all the shots are done. And I got to tell you, over the years, I found that to be not the best advice. That's certainly advice given to you by a doctor from his own perspective. But I've learned over the years, listen, when we had parvo scares and other things with parvo and coronaviruses and they were really running rampant, yes, that was a time where we were very careful, and it was scary because we didn't know much about parvo and these viruses, and they were maverick. But these days, we don't have those anymore. And when puppies are imprinting and they're staying at your house or your apartment, and they are not at least going out to the front of your house and seeing the world and sitting on your front lawn or walking up and down a few houses each side of you, maybe coming across another puppy of their age. These are all, as I said to you, imprinting stages from 3 to 5 months old. And you want to enhance that puppy's experience during these times because you can't make up for it later. When you don't get your puppy out and all of a sudden they start coming out of their house at 5 or 6 months, that's when we start noticing, wow, they get out front and they see another dog and they start barking like crazy because they may not have seen dogs up until that point. And now they get out there and they're seeing so many things and they're being overstimulated that instead of having a balanced response to some of the stimuli you're putting in front of them, they start overreacting. And that's where we get a lot of the behaviors that we as dog trainers hear from you folks as clients that you're having a rough time with. So this issue about your veterinarians telling you not to take the dogs out, please use that with a grain of salt. And by the way, I don't mean go to a dog park with them, and I don't mean go to the forest preserves with them where there's wild animals. I just mean take them outside in the front of your house, walk them up and down your block, put them in the car, drive to Starbucks, sit out there and have a coffee early morning where it's not too busy and they can see things. You will find that dogs that have this experience are much better, well-adjusted dogs than they would be if they didn't have these experiences. So that's now where we're getting to 4 to 5 to 6 months old. So everybody asks me, what's the best time to train a dog? The best time, 4 months old to 5 months old. I'm telling you, when we're done with a young dog like that, they work like adult dogs. I, over the years, became a puppy training center because of all my clients having their puppies trained and talking to their friends. That was one of our biggest percentages of dogs that we got in for training. And these little dogs work like adult dogs. And so we start talking a little bit now about training aids. And what I want to introduce now is, remember I talked to you about putting a nice nylon collar on your puppies around 10, 11, 12 weeks old? Well, around 4 months old, it's time to introduce a choke chain and leash. Now, I'm sitting here and I don't know where you guys come off on training tools, but I will tell you a harness and a halty are not training tools. They are management tools. And these kind of tools don't allow you to train a dog correctly. Using a harness is trying to drive a car without a steering wheel. Any kind of tool that we use to train dogs, if we use them incorrectly, it can cause problems. But if you start out and you know how to make the proper transitions, most dogs, most doodles who are going to grow up to be, if they're not miniature doodles, but we're talking now labradoodles, golden doodles, any of the larger breed doodles, these are dogs that are going to need to be trained with a choke chain, leash, and collar. I do not believe, and I'm not an advocate at all, in prong collars. I only would ever use a prong collar if I had a woman that was 90 pounds wet and they had a 90-pound dog and she couldn't control it. We may, after training, introduce a prong collar for that. But by and large, no. A choke chain is the right tool for the job, and that's what gets it done. So the right time to do training is 4 months to 5 months, and then 8 to 10 months thereafter. So basic training is anywhere from 4 months to 7 or 8 months, and then we can do advanced training from 9 months on to a year old. And these are the foundation months where we want a dog to grow up with this obedience as a way of life. Because once we establish this and we teach a dog after their puppyhood and having a wonderful first 3.5 to 4 months with us and just living like a trust fund baby, it's now time to give them a job. And as they learn these jobs, we want to have them grow up with them. For an example, when we teach a dog to heel at our left side, after we teach that foundation, when we go for walks, we want to have a dog start heeling. We don't want them pulling us down the street. I can't tell you how many people, after we've trained their dog, I go to their home and I ask them to show me what they've learned, and they allow the dog to start pulling the first half a block and sniffing and smelling, and I ask them, what are you doing? And they say, well, I'm trying to give my dog a leisurely walk before I start the training. And that's so wrong. It is, not the place to give your dog freedom there. It's like if we have children and they have to do homework, they're not watching TV while they're doing their homework, generally. Same thing is true with our dogs. When we're walking with them, once we've trained them, we are now making them work and we're teaching them how to apply this obedience. And that's the goal that we want to start setting. Now, there's other things that go hand in hand with this, and that is a little bit of housebreaking. Let's back up for a moment. Since we've talked about 8 to 10 weeks old, we start training again with feeding. There's the demand schedule of feeding where dogs are fed, they clean their plate, and they're done, and they go out to relieve themselves. Some people free feed, again, veterinarians telling them to do so. It may be the healthiest way to feed, but it is not the way to teach a dog housebreaking. Demand schedule of eating is the way that we do that. So we feed puppies when they are 8 to 10 weeks old. Twice a day is adequate. Some people I've heard feed 3 and 4 times a day. That's crazy. If you take, because the more times your dog is being fed, the more stools and spread out across the 12 or 24 hours that you have are going to be just more in, more out. So at 8 to 10 weeks old, twice a day is adequate. You can give a doodle the amount of food. Let's say it's 3 cups or 3.5 cups for the whole day. You break it down in 1.5 cups to 1.75 cups twice a day, not 3/4 of a cup 4 times a day. So that's allowing us to have this puppy housebreak a lot quicker the less amount of times we feed. And we feed twice a day, generally till they're around a year old. And then somewhere around a year old, dogs start dropping off one feed or the other, and they're kind of telling you they're ready to be fed once a day. And I believe we should feed dogs once a day in the morning. And morning feeds are great because by the time you have the last outing at night at 9 to 10 or 11, they're totally cleaned out from that one feed in the day. So it's a lot easier for them to go all night without relieving. But when they're puppies and they've been fed twice a day, you want to feed if you can, no later than 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon, because they have about a 6 to an 8 hour elimination cycle. So if you're done feeding by, say, 4, by 10 o'clock or 10:30, they're going to relieve themselves from that second feed. If you feed at 6 or 7 and you work that late, and you have to do that, well, okay, but then you want to relieve the dog as late as you can so they can make it overnight. And of course, we want to pull water from our dog somewhere around, if we're going to retire between 10 and 11, we want to pull water no later than 7, sometimes by 6 or 7. It just depends what's going on with your dog. If they're solid and they don't urinate in their crate, then, you can give it a little later. It depends. If they're having stools in the crate, then we need to feed a little earlier. So that's kind of a primer up to, say, a year old, training at 4 months, then maybe at 8 or 9 months. So these are some of the ways that we as dog trainers will deal with your dog. And there are 3 general things that we need to give our dogs, like air to breathe and good food. There's 3 concepts that I talk about all the time. For a well-balanced dog, you need to have correct management concepts, correct exercise, and good training. Those 3 things is what's going to make you successful rearing your dog and developing your dog correctly. When we talk about management, again, I've introduced this before, we're talking about a dog run, a crate. We have a thing called a tie down that we used when I was a guide dog instructor, that if we have a big living room and we want our dog to learn one section of the living room that's theirs, we use a tie down, which is a cable laminated. It's like a yachting cable with 2 dog clips on each end and a screw eye bolt that goes into the wall and a bed that's there. And it gives your dog a sense of not running totally free in your home. It's almost like a graduation from, let's say, a crate. And when a puppy starts getting 7, 8, 9, 10 months old, even though they may sleep in the crate at night, you may want to introduce them to what we call a tie down, which is once they're put on a tie down, they realize they're not running all throughout the house. They're on a tie down. We give them a rawhide chew bone. They learn that this is a timeout for them. And when they're on a tie down, that's the only game in town. So exercise, let's talk about that a little bit. I find that if you go to a dog park, and I don't really bring dogs to dog parks till at least 5 months in my mind, sometimes at 4 months, if I know the group of people that are there and I can see that I don't have any bad dogs, Rottweilers that are coming in or boxers that are overly aggressive. If I see a lot of young dogs, I may go in a little earlier. But exercise is important. And usually the average dog, after about 30 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe in the way of Doodles, an hour, a little over, that's enough for them in a given day. But you want to be clear to not bring your dog right after you fed him for at least 2 to 3 hours, because there is a thing called bloat or torsion, which can happen when a dog has a lot of food in their belly and water, and they go and play and they're running around. That stomach can flip inside the chest wall, and it causes a condition called torsion, where the rear intestine and the front esophagus is cut off from itself and it begins to blow up like a balloon. So that's, again, why we're very careful about not bringing a dog to exercise until after they have had at least 2 to 3 hours to digest their food correctly. So training is, there's different kinds of training that you can go through. You can do it by reading a book by the seat of your pants. That's one way to go. The second way is a group or a park class. And the trainers in group and park classes, unfortunately, if you go to PetSmart or Petco, you're usually not dealing with a very educated dog trainer. One of the best kind of dog trainers that you want to deal with are people that do inboard training, that have dealt with and trained dogs every day of their life for years and years and years. That's who you want to deal with. And let's bring up one more big question. Food or not to food? That's the big question, right? Everybody wants to know, can you use food? Well, I'm a believer in small bits of food. Dogs as puppies, it's a good way to introduce, paying attention, looking up at you, getting attention to you, and using treats in the beginning. And once you get the dog relating to you, we start dropping off of treats. What I am definitely not a believer in is clicker training, walking around with a bag full of food and feeding, and asking for behaviors and trying to redirect them. I really think it is a very poor way to train a dog. Usually where clicker training has come from are professional actors. These are dogs that are trained from clicker to get a behavior and be on a spot, just like a human actor. These dogs need to be on their marks and get their behaviors done immediately, and that's who clicker training was designed for. A lot of people take different methods and they try to apply it, and I'm just sorry. I am not a believer in clicker training for the average dog owner. I really believe in a connection. I liken obedience to a dance with your dog. Really. If you think about it, when you dance with somebody and you're dancing the cha-cha, you're learning certain moves. And that's what you're training a dog to do. You're training a dog to pay attention to you. You're training the dog to look at you. And you're training the dog to do a number of behaviors on that leash and collar. If you think about it, you can liken it to a dance. And I do. We call it a dance of life with a dog. That's what we talk about with our clients all the time. So once you have a meaningful relationship with your dog, you don't need a pocket full of food. You have a connection. You have a relationship. That dog, yes, wants to please you. And there's different degrees of that. Not every dog is sharp, and works animated and can't wait to take their eyes off you. It's not true for a lot of dogs across the board. Every dog is a brand new dog. And that's why professional trainers, we change our methodology based on the dog's temperament. If a dog is shy and soft, you've got to start so much slower and connect them and have them fall in love with you. And gradually, that soft dog that's connected to you and trusts you will be working like a champ once you do that. But when you have a tough, hard dog that's pulling you down the street like a steam shovel and is just outrageous and almost knocking you down and jumping all over you, you've got to start out pretty tough with that dog and start to let them understand that that does not go. They have to learn to not jump on you, to not pull you, and begin to watch you and look at you, and that's the way it is. And once we train a dog, then again, like I've said to you, we want to live that obedience with them and have them begin to model that behavior. And that's how we learn how to be successful with our dogs, is by growing up with obedience. And once you do this as a foundation, if you've done good training, and I must tell you, an inboard training kennel, if you guys consider this, I must tell you, you are professional people usually that own dogs. Even if you're not professional people, we've had people that were factory workers and they saved their money and they brought their dogs to us for training. I will tell you, there is nothing like a good inboard dog trainer. And I will talk to you later and maybe at another time about how to discover and how to make sure you're going to the right trainer. But I will tell you, it is worth all the money that you would invest in a good dog trainer to have them do a foundation of obedience work for you in 1 month of basic and the second month's advanced off-leash training. It is invaluable, and I can't stress that enough. So, the other way I was starting to talk about the 4 ways to train, again, yourself, group, private, and inboard. Those are the 4 ways to get a dog to be trained. Now, the other thing I want to back up about, and that is for you guys that have apartments, and you're dying to have a dog, if you've gotten a puppy, you may have done a bad thing. But if you haven't gotten a dog yet, having a dog that's 3 and 4 or 5 years old is awesome. And for you folks that have, professional lives and want to still own a dog and you live in a condo or an apartment, if you get an older dog, you can make that work for you. But if you get a puppy, I'm telling you, you're compromising doing the right thing for your puppy. And if you do this, there still is a way to make it work. But it's going to take a lot of investment financially to have support staff to help you with your dog if you can't do it yourself, if you're gone out of your house 8 to 10 hours a day. So I don't want to dwell on that now because I don't want to leave a lot of negativity here. But for some of you, unfortunately, that, you've bought into this and got a puppy, and, you've got to try to raise it the best way you can, and a professional dog trainer can really help you with that. So that's, by and large, my little treatise in a generic sense, of how to raise a dog correctly from a puppy to where they are at a year old. And now let's talk about some extreme behaviors. A lot of you, when I looked at the website, so many of you talked about jumping up and the dog's running away and barking at everything, prey drive, picky eaters, leash aggression. I heard this like crazy, that my dog loves the dog park, but if I walk him up and down the street, he's crazy. He barks at every dog he sees, yet he's great in a dog park. Usually, these dogs have not had early training, or they probably haven't had early socialization. Or if you did do those things, you've got a dog that's genetically wired differently, and you absolutely need a dog trainer. A dog trainer in a large kennel is invaluable because we have dogs. In my kennel, for an example, I employed 23 people. I had 150 dogs at our busiest time, but usually had 100 dogs a day at the kennel. And my trainers train 8 to 9 dogs a day, and I had 3 to 4 trainers all the time. So we have the ability to expose your dog to other dogs. We do it in noisy time where all the dogs are out barking. We do it in quiet time if they're too much, so we can expose them to lots of distractions and do it on your behalf, and do it in a way that's objective and controlled. They come into the kennel and they see dog training as a wonderful break in their day, whereas somebody comes and gets them usually twice a day and works with them in a very loving, controlled way, and they learn to love disobedience, and they learn to love the trainers. You'll see that, and that's, again, one way to learn if you've got a good trainer, because when you go back to that boarding facility, that dog should pull you into that facility and be wagging his tail 2 blocks prior to getting there. That's the mark of a good facility and a good dog trainer. And your dog will tell you all you need to know about how they've been worked with. When dogs are demonstrated to you, you want to see a happy working dog. And you want to see, before you even bring your dog, you want to see dogs demonstrated to you. And you want to now, in the days of social media, Yelp and Google are your friend. People can't stand but telling wonderful stories, but they love telling bad stories and warning people. So you'll learn very quickly from Yelp or Google reviews exactly what you need to know about the kennel you're dealing with. And if some of you want to go to my website just to look at it, you'll see that I don't have any negative reviews. I have one negative review after 39 years of somebody who felt it was negative, but they never put their dog in for kennel in for training. I evaluated the dog and told them that it was a pit bull and aggressive, and I told them a lot of things that they didn't want to hear. They did go to another trainer, and they felt that they were dealt with in a successful way, and good for them. But they wrote a negative review. We didn't even train the dog. But other than that, no negative reviews. And you'll enjoy looking at my website. It was really a neat facility. It's too bad we closed and I retired. It was originally the home of Lassie. We had Rin Tin Tin from early, training for some of you that aren't just young, under 20 or 30. Rin Tin Tin was a very important TV series early on, and Toto from The Wizard of Oz was trained out of my kennel, and I think you'll enjoy reading the history of my kennel. Other than that, I'd like to say that I'd like to draw this to a close, and I'll open up for questions from you. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation here today. I hope I've helped you in ways that either helped you learn new ways to be or reinforce the ways that you are being, so you know you're doing things right. And in the meanwhile, I'll turn this back over to Courtney, and if you guys would like to ask some questions, I'll be happy to try to take questions as long as we can do that. And again, thank you for having me tonight. It was highly enjoyable for me to help you, if I have, with my passion for dogs. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rick. That really, you taking your time to talk to our group on this live call is huge for all of us. So guys, I'm going to go ahead and open the questions over to you. If you can, just go ahead and you'll see the chat box option on the screen. If you have any specific questions that you would...
Do you want to do it, Courtney? Do you want to do it and turn it on vocally? Or maybe you can try to get the question and then let them go vocal? Whatever you'd like to do, I'm happy to try to assist and give some answers to some questions if I can.
Let's do that, actually. I'm going to go ahead, and it looks like we've got a question. Someone is asking if getting a second dog is a good or bad idea. And I'm going to go ahead
That's great.
And unmute them so they can...
Let me deal with that.
Yeah.
That is one of the biggest questions that's asked of me. And I will tell you the way I think about that. I would get a second dog after my first dog is perfect. Getting a second dog and having two dogs at the same time, because the biggest reason we do that, all my clients say is, so my dog won't be, lonely in the backyard. And so I want him to have a partner. And I will tell you, when you get that first dog, there's a lot of work to be done. When you get a second dog, now you're multiplying your feed costs, your training costs, your veterinarian costs. And most of you know, dog ownership anymore is not an inexpensive proposition. If you want to travel, you have to board your dog or have people come in and watch your dog at your home, and that's pretty pricey as well. So if you live a good lifestyle with your dog, you're going to meet your dog's needs by getting it to dog parks, by traveling with it, taking it places with you. And so I will say my answer is get that first dog perfect, then absolutely go get another dog. Why not? As long as you can afford it, and maybe one of you is going to take on the responsibility and the obedience to one, and the other family member is going to take on the other, sure. But when you have one person trying to do two dogs at the same time, it's really tough. It's almost like, going to the doctor and thinking you're going to find out about your baby, and they tell you, guess what? You've got two heartbeats there. Anybody that's raised twins, they know what kind of responsibility that is. So that's my answer about more than one dog at the same time.
Thank you so much for answering that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take another question here. So we've got a question from Jenny, and she's saying, how many times a day should we do training and for how long?
Great. Another really good question. Thank you. Dog training, I usually train, when I train by 2 sessions a day, morning and afternoon. and I usually I work them up to 20 minutes as puppies. As an older dog, I'm looking to work a dog for 30 minutes once a day, maybe 40 minutes if they're real hyper. So that can be once a day. But when we start out with young dogs, they do not have an attention span for 30 or 40 minutes. They have an attention span for 10 minutes starting out at 4 months, 5 months. When they're 6 and 7 months, they can do 40 minutes at a crack, 20 minutes at a crack, maybe 25 if they're real hyper. Busy shepherds, tough terriers. Sometimes, 25 minutes is not enough. It's 30 minutes twice a day, 35 minutes twice a day. But the average dog that's not a hard head, 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes max twice a day. But once you've gotten your dog fully trained, you just want to live the obedience. It's no longer where you have to practice the piano every day. Once you've learned how to work your dog, then it's about living the obedience. And I drop back into a foundation of training when a dog is giving me a rough time, especially when I do off-leash. If I start having some issues at recalls or distraction out in public, then I go back to leash work and I start working again. But usually when I do off-leash work, I use an e-collar for that. It usually is a wonderful tool, and it is absolutely the best way to do off-leash training. But I hope that answers your questions about dog training. That's about the time that we put into our dogs at the kennel.
Great. Thank you for that one. We've got a really common question here from Alexa. So she said, you mentioned not being a big fan of training the dog with food, which seems like a tenet of the positive reinforcement approach. So her question is, what would you suggest as an alternative reward system when training your dog?
Well, if you would watch me train, you would see me running at the mouth, talking to this dog, touching their shoulders. When I take a right turn, I'm talking to them, I'm moving. Remember, I likened it to a dance. I give a light correction with my leash and collar. They come and turn to me, oh, that a boy, all right, good boy. And I'm talking to them and I'm dancing with them. By the way, guys, dog training is a lot of work. It is not for the lighthearted. By the time we're done in a half hour working a dog twice a day, we're really working at trying to get that dog to pay attention to us. Really, people see food as a lazy man's way of dog training. If you're going to do the right method of dog training, you're talking to your dog, you're turning left and right, you're making the dog pay attention to you. If you see your dog looking to the left, I take a right turn. Now, I don't make extreme corrections. I make the right amount of correction. And by the way, I do use food. Please understand, I don't never use food. But it is not clicker training, and it is not food after food after food. When I train with a leash and collar, it's almost a very fluid movement of automatic sits, heeling, left and right turns, sit, down, stay, a 2-minute sit stay, a 4-minute down stay with distractions. And it takes a good month of daily work to get a foundation for a professional trainer to do a great job on leash, and another month for off leash. Believe me when I tell you, for a lay person, it's going to take you a lot longer. It takes me 3 years to make a good dog trainer, and sometimes more for advanced part of things in protection work or off-leash work. It sometimes may take more than 3 years. So you have to understand, when you have one dog, using food feels like an easy way to go, but that is not really the best way to move. So it's about vocal reinforcement, and yes, using food in a small degree, and once you have their attention, using your relationship with them. So I hope that answers that question.
Great, thank you. Is it okay if we take a couple more questions?
Absolutely, I'm here. I'm happy to talk to your group, and let's keep going and see what they want to hear.
Okay, so we've got a question from Paige here, and she's asking about her 9-month-old puppy. She said that her dog alert barks at home when he hears someone outside. Now she's wondering, how can she train that away?
All right, let's deal with barking. You know what? That's a great question. And your breed, let's face it, guys, we're not talking the quietest breed in the world here as Doodles. Doodles are big mouths, and barking can be a horrendous part of raising up a Doodle. And they are ultra sensitive to a lot of things, and barking is the way they learn to deal with it. Now, this is why I talked to you early on about a balanced rearing of your puppy, so that you don't have them creating extreme behaviors. But when we have a dog obsessing in their barking, and I mean, you know what that is. That's not a dog that just barks a little bit and settles. We're talking a dog that's barking, 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 barking for 15, 20, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. That's obsessive. That's an obsession. That needs a barking collar. Barking collars are not a horrendous tool. They are, in used effectively and correctly, a wonderful tool to teach a dog the art of quiet. Because when you're gone during the day, these barking collars are designed to work at every time. I'm not the believer of the kind that used to kick up. There is a electronic component to them. There's usually 8 levels. Most dogs at the second level to third level is where they learn it. And when you're gone during the day, they're not barking like crazy people, especially in an apartment. Sometimes barking needs a barking collar, and that is, by and large, the best tool for barking. I'm here to tell you, teaching your dog to command quiet is, it could be a singing song between you. You yell quiet, they bark. You yell quiet, they bark. It's like you're doing a duet. A lot of times the only solution for you is a barking collar. Now, we once had an extreme dog. It was a Dalmatian that came to the kennel. And I mean, they couldn't walk it on the street without it being crazy. So we got it used to a barking collar. It stopped barking. It had to wear the barking collar all the time. And it went out in the public and started getting trained. Now, gradually, it took a few years. It didn't happen right away. But the dog began to go out and be better out in public. It was obviously miswired, and they used to take the collar off, and then sometimes they'd have to put it back on. So extreme barking, the only solution, barking collar. Hope that helps.
Okay, that was awesome. And if we can ask this one last question, and then we'll wrap it up to respect your time. Is that okay? One last question?
Sure.
Okay, so here we go. So this question is in regards to someone's dog who is peeing when it's excited. She said that it's basically housebroken, no issues.
Right.
But
right.
Sometimes this dog will pee out of excitement, or she said that she was confident that her dog was trained. However, there has been random accidents throughout the house.
Okay. Well, first of all, urinating, dogs that are very soft and sensitive, sometimes when you approach them, for example, you have friends come over and they see your dog, and Misty is your dog's name. Oh, Misty, how are you? And the dog starts peeing. Usually females do that more than males, but some males do that too. I've taught my clients to, when their friends come over, many times, don't even have your dog at the front door. Let your dog be in a dog run outside or in a crate in the bedroom. Once everybody comes in, have them introduced to your dog, but do it in a quiet fashion without that high-pitched hyper extension of their voice, because that makes a lot of dogs pee. Now, some dogs do what they call submissive peeing, and that's, as I said to you, a real soft, sensitive dog. Some dogs, may have peed because they're physically being corrected a little too hard. They tell you that they're a little, that's how they talk to you that way. Now, the other thing is that you have to control water sometimes on young dogs. And, when they're urinating occasionally, there is physical things. You want to make sure you're not dealing with a kidney problem. But if it's just urinating from shyness or urinating from being excited, you have to control that dog's environment to minimize it. And sometimes it doesn't outgrow it for a long time. So I've seen dogs that do this behavior for up to a year old. And we have dogs that come in for training that stop that behavior for us, but do it for the clients because they don't have a balanced relationship with the dog. And sometimes the husband's a little too hard. Sometimes maybe the dog's a little too soft and they're too permissive. So there's a lot of reason that submissive urinating happens. And it usually doesn't have much to do with housebreaking, like your member asked, because they pretty much have a housebroken dog when they're alone with the dog. These are things that come up with other people coming over or approaching your dog that cause these problems. So you got to be a good quarterback for your dog and tell your friends and family and strangers how to approach your dog to minimize any of these kind of problems. Hope that helps.
Thank you so much. All right, guys, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up this call. To go further, if you have any more questions for Rick, we're going to address all of our training questions directly to Rick. I've done a ton of research, and I really do trust everything that he recommends for obvious reasons. His history says it all. So I'm going to go ahead and create a document in the file section of our group where you guys can feel free to go ahead and ask any questions you have there at any time. Rick will personally review all of the questions that are posted on that file. So the file is going to be called Questions for Rick Karl, Hollywood Celebrity Dog Trainer. And so remember, guys, we are on Instagram. Our handle is Doodles United. The headshot is of a white dog. That's actually Max, my sheepadoodle. You can also find us on YouTube. Our YouTube channel is just called Doodles United. And we're actually almost done building out our new website, which will be doodlesunited.dog. You can also type in doodlesunited.com and you'll be redirected there as well. So I'm looking forward to, continuing forward with more interviews to help you guys really learn and discover what it takes to really take care of your doodle dogs. And, being a doodle parent is a ton of work. I hear you. I've been there. I've got two really long-haired fluffy dogs. It's a lot of work. So we're going to jump into some really cool things coming forward. All right, guys, chat soon.